Good morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock. I'd like to start on time. If everybody could join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have a quorum, and we have, is Darcy on?
Yes, so Chair, pursuant to Assembly Bill 2449, we need to do a roll call vote because we're conducting hybrid meetings. And I believe one of our members was going to attend remotely.
Okay.
So I will go ahead and conduct the roll call.
Okay.
And I will start with Ms. Trent,
Here.
Ms. Miller, Vice Chair Campbell,
Here.
Mr. Zemer,
Here.
Chief Robertson,
Here.
Sheriff Hansel,
Here.
Mr. Bronkel,
Present.
and Mr. Cole.
Here.
All right, so Ms. Miller had informed me that she would be attending remotely because she is out traveling, but I don't see her in the meeting yet. So if she comes into the meeting, then we can announce that, and she can come in and say that she's participating remotely and the reason.
Okay, thanks. Okay, are there any modifications to the agenda? Is there any public modifications to the agenda? No.
And Vice Chair Campbell, I will also note that Chair Robbins has resigned from the committee. So right now we are operating with 7 members, which is a quorum.
Right. Okay, great. Okay, is there any, are we ready for public comment on non-agenda items?
Currently, I don't show any hands up in
Okay.
Zoom.
Great. Okay, so we would like the county administrative office updates.
All right. Thank you. So on April 25th, the County Administrative Office presented to the Board of Supervisors the prioritized list that was generated by the committee. And at that time, the Board of Supervisors took no action to adopt any of the or allocate any funding towards that list. In that agenda item, and I talked about it a little bit in the staff report later in this agenda, at the direction of the County Administrative Officer, I did talk about the action that this committee took to form the ad hoc committee here and discussed some of the reasoning for formation of that committee, and talked about some of the activities that the ad hoc was pursuing there. At that meeting, the Board of Supervisors formed its own ad hoc committee with a couple recommendations, a couple actions for the committee. Some of those actions were to develop a policy around the use of one-time funds, and to ensure that those one-time funds were allocated towards one-time expenses. And another direction was for that committee to explore what it would look like to reallocate or deallocate the positions that were allocated in fiscal year 22-23. So you know that there were 16 additional positions allocated last year to the county. And another direction was to explore the idea of, or to return to the board with a percentage-based allocation methodology. And so that work has begun. The Board of Supervisors ad hoc, or the Board of Supervisors directed that ad hoc to meet with the ad hoc from this committee to work on some of those things. And we can talk about it a little bit later in the agenda with some of the recommendations that the Measure Z ad hoc has formed and presented to your committee. Those are my updates.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank everybody on the ad hoc committee because that's a lot of work. They've already met 6 times. And especially when I think Tammy, she's driven over 300 miles in those 6 meetings. So that's a lot of dedication to our program. I just wanted some clarity from you, please. It was my understanding when we voted on this ad hoc committee that we were going to go in and garner some information about empty spaces and extra money that hadn't been spent. And then that was going to go to the ad hoc committee, and they were going to sort of strategize some different ways that that money could come back to us on our side of the ball court, and then bring that back to us. And then we, as a committee, would, look at it, thank them, and really kind of ponder that and make some decisions and vote on it, and then present it to the Board of Supervisors. So I'm a little, and also that this was not an ongoing committee. This is not a subcommittee, a standing committee under our group. I mean, that was never voted on. So I thought by this point, once the recommendations came, that that was the end of the ad hoc. So it sounds to me like the board is directing our ad hoc committee to do more work. And so can you, I'd like that clarified, because before we move forward, I feel like we need to know exactly what's going on. And I think the ad hoc committee doesn't think it's an ongoing ad hoc committee either, like forever. So could you clarify that, please?
Yes, thank you for that question. Ad hoc committees by nature cannot be standing committees. Those that would involve Brown Act. So those would have to be publicly noticed meetings. An ad hoc committee is required to be short-term in nature around a specific task. So that is what your ad hoc committee is. The action that was taken to form the ad hoc committee was to look at the process that your committee uses to develop recommendations. It is a very broad, in my opinion, action for the committee to take. And so that can encompass a lot, and you can see in the recommendations provided by the ad hoc that it's a pretty wide-ranging topic that they covered. And as far as recommendations presented to the board, this was a topic of discussion when we went to the Board of Supervisors, and technically there were no recommendations in there from the ad hoc. I try to make that very clear and try to take that very seriously coming from this committee, because the process was that the Measure Z ad hoc would present recommendations to your committee, then your committee would take action on those recommendations. And at the same time, after discussing with the county administrative officer, she wanted to make sure that the board was aware of the situation facing Measure Z this year, because as we all know, it's a very unusual, not typical situation that is facing Measure Z, the county, and all of its agencies. So that was the reasoning for putting some of that discussion and having that discussion with the Board of Supervisors, letting them know that there's not enough money right now. It's an unusual year. Goes along with the theme that the county is facing budget-wise. We're facing shortfalls in a lot of different areas. And so we wanted to make sure that the board was aware that Measure Z is being affected also, and to raise that to them and find out what they want to do from there.
So do you foresee that they think this is an ongoing ad hoc, or how long, was there a time element in that at all?
It was not a time element, but around a specific task.
So now they're on a different task, or is this still the same task that we asked them to do?
I believe this is still around the same task.
Okay. Billy?
Yeah, thank you, Ginger, for bringing this up. It was concerning because, the ad hoc group did do some good work, did meet with a lot of people, but it was my understanding that all that stuff should have come to us first. And I really don't know what the rush was to bring it to the board regarding these recommendations, because literally, we can't do anything until next budget year. you know, the budget year this year is already kind of in place. And we made our recommendations, and those are up to the board of what they want to do. And so I'm just not really too sure what the rush was to bring some recommendations, though it was maybe modified somewhat to say this is what they're discussing. But I think it was ill-advised, and I think this ad hoc committee should have reported to us first, and that we could have come up with a recommendation together, and then presented those to the board to consider in a future meeting to talk about next budget year and how we're going to deal with Measure Z. So that way we could all be on the same page. That way when the Board of Supervisors calls us and says, hey, what's this stuff about, you know, Measure Z and ad hoc committee and your recommendations, it's like, well, that was just the ad hoc group. That wasn't the Measure Z board that made those recommendations. So, and then second question would be the ad hoc committee that the board is now assembled, does that involve our representatives in our ad hoc? Are we a part of that now with the board, or how is their ad hoc committee made up?
So the Board of Supervisors ad hoc, or the Board of Supervisors directed their ad hoc committee to, in coordination with your ad hoc committee, look at things like a percentage allocation methodology for Measure Z funding.
But would that be for next year, or do you know?
It's not clear yet.
Okay, Glenn?
And I will say at the same time, the Board of Supervisors has not adopted any funding allocations related to Measure Z for 22-23 or 23-24. So in my opinion, it could potentially affect 23-24.
Okay. Okay.
Just to clarify the process a little bit, the Measure Z ad hoc committee met amongst themselves and also with county department heads, I think 5 or 6 times, 6 I guess. The goal being basically, when you take a look at the revenue projections from both the county's consultant and the more general revenue projections of agencies that do that for government entities throughout California and the United States, it's pretty clear that this current circumstance is not a one-time occurrence. The county's consultant projects level or decreasing sales tax revenues over the next few years, and the national projections obviously follow that. So the impetus for our discussions were to take a look and say, have our historic procedures as we've conducted ourselves served us well, and will they serve us well in that more strident environment? And I think the answer that everybody came to was that at this point it at least makes sense to take a look at some of the practices that we have had historically and look at them in the context of the new circumstances and say, do we want to continue to do business this way? When we finished our series of meetings, I and the committee communicated to Sean saying, it's clear to us as the ad hoc committee that we need to have a meeting quickly with the Measure Z committee, because we didn't want to go against the protocol that had been established. We wanted to bring these recommendations back to this committee so that they could either be supported or denied, and then we would have a clear posture going forward to the Board of Supervisors. Unfortunately, the timing of the Board of Supervisors' decision to form their own ad hoc and the direction that staff was given to have the board's ad hoc meet with our ad hoc made that timeline difficult. And quite frankly, just as a courtesy and protocol, it didn't seem like as an ad hoc committee that is advisory to the board, we could tell the Board of Supervisors, we don't want to meet with your ad hoc committee. We did make it clear that the recommendations that we are bringing to you today had not been approved by the whole committee and were in fact recommendations of an ad hoc committee to the Measure Z committee. And in fact, we didn't even discuss a number of the specific recommendations with the board for that very specific reason. I think it's fair to say the communication and what the clarity that I did gain from their joint meeting with the board's ad hoc was that they are struggling mightily with how to address this. And they are looking very strongly to this committee for some pretty specific recommendations. So I can understand from an external point of view where it might look like your ad hoc got out of line and went, around the process. And I want to stress that that is not the case. We communicated with the county staff. In fact, I sent a couple emails. I know Nicholas sent one saying, hey, we urgently need a meeting with the Measure Z committee so we can vet these recommendations to see if there's something we even want to take to the Board of Supervisors. So the timing would suggest that that's not what happened, but in fact, that is the reality of the situation.
Okay, do we have any, or can you even report, are we still at the same 600 and something thousand dollars, or has that changed at all? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, we're still at the $623,000 is what we're looking to
Okay.
allocate. And I would just, as a point of order, we have a lot to discuss that is later in the meeting, and we still have to approve the minutes from the prior meeting. But that was my update for the actions that had taken place since the last time that your committee met in full.
Okay, thank you. So we need an approval of the March 9th action summary.
I move to adopt the March 9th action summary.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been approved and seconded to accept that. Okay, so we're going to review recommendations of the,
Oh, Chair, we just need to make sure that we go out to public comment
oh, for the-
and
for the dis-
have
for-
a vote. Yes,
for the action summary?
for the action
Is there
summary,
any
yes.
public comment on our action summary from March 9th?
There are none on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Any in the audience? No. Okay, thank you. Okay, now,
And then
so,
I'll go ahead and do a roll call vote for the action summary.
okay,
Okay. Ms. Trent,
Yes.
Vice Chair Campbell,
yes.
Mr. Zemer,
Yes.
Chief Robertson, Sheriff,
Yes.
Mr. Bronco,
Yes.
Ms. Cole, Mr. Cole.
Yes.
Thank you. Now we can go. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so now we're going to review the recommendations of the Measure Z Ad Hoc Committee. Do you want me to read this, or do you want to read it?
I can go and present it.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, not to repeat much of my update, but on March 2nd this year, your committee formed an ad hoc committee to review the process to develop recommendations to send to the board. That work has happened. That ad hoc committee consisted of Ms. Trent, Mr. Zemer, and Mr. Cole. Like I said, we met with several departments over that time. And below is, or in this agenda item, are 8 recommendations provided by the committee. There's a little bit of context to each recommendation. Some of these recommendations may require more discussion than others. So just as a point of order, if there are any motions that your committee wants to make towards these recommendations, feel free to take those recommendations in groups if you would like, and then we can have votes, go out to public comment, or we can take them one by one as you would like. But I would defer to the committee, or if you would like, I can provide some context around each of the recommendations.
Is there a way to post those so people can see them? On the, from out of the area, not out of,
Yeah, it's up on the screen, so they should be able
fine.
to
Okay.
they should be able to see them.
sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
see it. on the back of my-
So the I will actually quickly go through each of the recommendations if you don't mind.
Yeah.
The first recommendation is to require agencies who are receiving or applying for funds to conduct a self-audit. This would be around ensuring they let us know month by month whether the staff that have been funded by Measure Z have actually been on the payroll, and if those staff are in training or on leave or fully functional, just as a matter to ensure that we are, that the community is receiving the services that are being provided by Measure Z funding. The second recommendation is to create a criteria for allowable costs. This could come in a variety of ways, preferably by interpreting or stealing from somebody else's model, but it's creating categories for allowable personnel costs and equipment and services costs, so that not everything in the kitchen sink is thrown in with these entire applications. Recommendation number 3 would be to create a reserve policy. As we know, there are ongoing costs that ongoing expenditures that this committee is interested in funding every year, but revenue from Measure Z is not fixed. It's dependent on the economy, and so in that case, creating some kind of a reserve for Measure Z might be a good idea to ensure that we can fund those ongoing costs in bad years. Best practices are to ensure about 15 to 20%, 16% actually is the best practice to create reserves for this purpose. Recommendation number 4 would be to create a mechanism that would allow the committee to recommend partial funding of applications. This has been a topic for your committee just about every year. Your committee has often deferred to applicants and agencies to have them say what the services are that are required to perform the service that they are applying for. There have been some questions about whether each part of the application is necessary or we don't have enough funding to fund applications in full. And so this mechanism would be to create a process to allow partial funding while ensuring some level of service towards those applications. That would require a little bit of work and staff time and things like that. Recommendation number 5 would be to require agencies to report on other funding sources they have pursued to replace Measure Z. In each application that a agency fills out, there is an area where we ask, what are you going to do essentially if Measure Z funding is not there for you in the following year? And it's to provide a contingency plan. And so that would hopefully be to find other funding sources or loop that into some of their core services. And some of these projects have been designed to be, have Measure Z provide basically bridge funding while that pursuit is happening. And so this recommendation is basically asking agencies, what have you done? What funding sources have you pursued? Let us know why that hasn't occurred, why hasn't that happened? Recommendation number 6 is to adopt a stance that the committee will not recommend any more county positions to be funded with Measure Z. As your committee is well aware, when a county position has been funded historically in the past, those costs have been guaranteed for the following year, which affects the amount of funding that is, amount of discretionary funding that is available for the following year. And so this recommendation is to adopt a stance, even if there's one-time funding that becomes available, that funding would not be eligible to fund ongoing county staff positions. Recommendation number 7 would be to establish a target of 67% of ongoing revenue to be allocated each year to county departments, with a goal of that being achieved by fiscal year 26-27. This recommendation is based on historical trends that we have seen with Measure Z. And I will note one distinction in this recommendation. The word ongoing revenue here is important, is a subtle but important distinction between ongoing and total revenue. If you'll notice in attachment number 1, I believe, there are trends of for the past 6 years that show the allocations by year to various agencies. And there's a difference between the ongoing revenue and the total revenue available. The total revenue available includes ongoing Measure Z funding plus the one-time funding that comes in. So that's any unspent funding from the prior year or funding that is above our projections. So that's where the 67% number comes in. So that is different than the ongoing revenue. The ongoing revenue, the county expenses have been around 75% every year. So I would make that distinction there. If your committee wanted to act on recommendation number 7, then there are a couple choices that you would be looking to make. You could recommend that the county departments receive annual allocations as a percentage of the ongoing revenue, or you could recommend that county departments and outside agencies receive a percentage of ongoing revenue. And then the final recommendation is to reconsider fiscal year 23-24 recommendations after reductions to county allocations. As I mentioned before, the Board of Supervisors ad hoc has been tasked with basically finding extra money in Measure Z by potentially deallocating positions that were allocated in 22-23, thereby freeing up additional funding. If all of the positions were deallocated, that would free up about $1.6 million. If all the positions less the public works brush cutting positions were deallocated, that's 4 positions. If those positions were deallocated, that would free up about $1.2 million in 23-24. And the distinction between the public works position is notable because that application was your #1 rated application last year. And also, of the 16 positions that were allocated last year, there is only 1 position that's been filled, and that was in the public works the public works staff. No other positions have been filled or are filled at this time. So that was a lot. I would defer to the ad hoc committee to provide any additional context or anything else that they want to add.
Just if there's any specific questions, obviously, I think it makes sense to go through these one by one. Some of them are relatively simple, some of them are relatively complex. Some are just a modification to a slight degree of our historic pattern, and some of them are pretty much a reversal of our historic pattern. So as I mentioned, we spent 6 meetings. We talked to the county department heads. So I think we could speak with some clarity to their desires and so on. But without, knowing what your questions and stuff are, it seems like it's premature to start a discussion. So my suggestion would be we just take them one by one and grind through them.
I think that's a productive process.
Do you want me to do it, or do you want to do it? Who's the head of your committee?
Whatever the sheriff's pleasure is.
Why don't you go ahead and do it?
Okay, the first recommendation, which is to require a self-audit on staffing. There's been discussion at the committee level for a number of years about the fact that there is not consistency between applicants as far as what's considered, salary and so on. So our suggestion here is very straightforward, that we think the application process should include a form that specifies in a very detailed way what is eligible for inclusion. In other words, salary costs will include salary, workers' comp, retirement, whatever components we want. If you look at the applications comparatively, and I'm just going to use the police applications because there's a wider array of those. If you look at the components in Eureka's application versus Arcata's versus Fortuna's, there is not consistency in what we are funding agency to agency. So this isn't, in any way suggesting that any agency has done anything inappropriate. But in the process of trying to clean all of this up, it makes sense to us that there be a level playing field, and all of those agencies and any others that wanted to apply would know at the application point in time that this particular component is eligible for consideration and these particular elements are not. And that way there would be consistency agency to agency, and I'll call it low-level agitation that exists amongst those agencies about the consistency of the components funded would be eliminated. So the goal here is to do this also on a self-auditing basis. The ad hoc committee is very sensitive to the fact that the staffing level at the CEO's office is such that we can't be piling work onto them. So this would be essentially a spreadsheet that would be filled out position by position, submitted to the county, and that way the legwork and stuff would be done by the applicant rather than the county staff.
Are we talking about recommendation number 2? Is that what you're referring to there? As opposed to 1?
I'm sorry, I misspoke. You're correct. I did speak to number 2 instead of number 1. Number 1 is simply, there's been discussion and awareness in the committee level that there have been occasions when agencies didn't have a position filled for a substantial time period, but it would appear that they still receive the Measure Z funding. So again, this is a self-audit function, and the applicants would be required to confirm probably on a quarterly basis, I would think, to the county that this position, number 1, is not vacant. Number 2, this position is not in a training or other function where it is not operational in the context of the application, and that the position is functioning as envisioned by the applicant in essentially a full array, so that we know, first of all, that the position isn't vacant, and we know that we aren't paying for somebody who's on long-term workman's comp or leaves or extended training or other absences. So the goal here is just to make sure that the position is actually filled and functional.
I'd like to add to that briefly. And I feel from our committee's point of view, when receiving applications from agencies that have continuing positions, that self-audit would allow us to see the functionality of that position in a historical pattern. So when we're considering, do we want to recommend this, or how do we want to rate this as a priority, it gives us a tool to refer how functional is this position for services to the public, as opposed to what is the application.
Okay.
I have a question. Was there discussion of a mechanism to get us the information? Because essentially we're looking at the past fiscal year to make determinations or decisions for the next fiscal year, and that's really the position we're in now. Generally, mid-year is when salary savings can be effectively calculated, and obviously the self-audit saves the staff work, so I think that's a great idea. But was there discussion on then communicating that to us so that, for example, when we start our process in March, we would have a good idea of what was unspent that we could then, that would be an ongoing cost that would be able to be pulled out essentially.
Yeah, I think I can speak for the committee and say that our expectation would be that the applicant would submit these quarterly reports, and then if that applicant submitted an application for the subsequent fiscal year, that those quarterly reports would simply be an attachment that would come to the committee members as part of that agency's application. So that's how they would be communicated to you. Assuming that agency desired to continue the position, then they would simply attach the quarterly reports, and we could see the history of that position when we were considering that application in the subsequent year.
Can I ask a question first? So if somebody has a position saying it hasn't been filled for 3/4 of the year, can that money go back into the kitty at some point for that fiscal year, or do we have to wait till the next year?
If agencies are not complying with the terms of their agreement with the county, then there are provisions within each of those agreements that have financial implications in terms of bringing funding back to the county. It's ensuring that we would have to look through the agreement, but I believe so, yeah.
Okay, Bill?
So the current quarterly reports, Sean, they just report out on whether or not they're meeting their benchmarks as far as financially goes, and then also the goals set forth by their application, but they don't say specifically what the positions are doing. Is that really what?
Yeah, we have the quarterly reports. We have them set up in templates and ask them questions, services you're providing to the community. What have you learned from Measure Z? How is this bettering the community? And we have them submit invoices for their whatever their costs are from within the application. But there is nothing within those reports that would allow us to determine whether or not there was a specific person in that position that is described in the application. Sometimes it looks like there are positions that are fulfilling the services that are described in the application. I don't believe it's happened very much, but that's the distinction there.
I do want to acknowledge that Tom Matson's here, that he did say, I am going to fill my positions once the equipment's ready. You know, and I do understand that. So there would be exceptions, I suppose, to the rule. You know, it's like you have to have them, you're building the material, and then you have to have somebody to fill it. So, yeah.
And then just, I mean, with anyone that's hiring knows that as soon as the funding is there, it takes months, right? 2 to 3 months. If you have all your stuff together and there is a qualified applicant pool, that sometimes it takes 2 or 3 months. But I think what this recommendation says is a good thing. We want to see allocations, specific allocations, date hired, and date put into service. For me, no matter what they are, as far as, you know, there's going to be a training period. So having a training period on there, I mean, fulfills my desire to have this, you know, this recommendation met. Because oftentimes it takes 6 months, almost a year, as far as public safety goes, to actually get someone on their own and actually fulfilling the function of that goal. But I just want to make sure that, you know, that those things are tracked, and I think that is a good recommendation.
I want to add a quick, just comment of clarity. From my view, what the goal on this one also is collecting that reporting data and making it part of the application process officially, so that becomes a tool that we have as committee members to easily reference and easily have attached to the proper application, the proper role, rather than having to sort it out individually.
Yeah. Bob was next, and then
Nicholas answered my question,
Okay.
which was essentially make the quarterly reporting part of an attachment if you're requesting personnel as your Measure Z application. You would have that as a backup.
okay. Sean?
The implication I'm getting, though, is that this doesn't apply to any county positions that are ongoing, that are not applied for again. And that's kind of the big problem we're dealing with. So is that addressed in another recommendation?
I would just say that this would apply to everyone that submits an application or a quarterly report. All county departments have to submit a quarterly report as well. And so we would, those are a public accessible document, and so we can provide them to the committee.
Yeah, I think the big change that we're as a committee are dealing with, or frankly wanting, is a much deeper accountability of the funds. And so what this says to me is we as committee members should be paying attention to the quarterly reports and not then just looking at the new applications, but then saying these county departments that have been funded have unallocated positions that equal $1.2 to $1.6 million. So is that going to affect our recommendations? Maybe not, but we can at least report to the county board of supervisors what the bigger picture is. So I think that's a very good recommendation.
Sorry not to belabor this, but I really believe that's what this committee is supposed to do, right? We're supposed to be accountable to these funds. And so if there are departments within the county that aren't utilizing these funds, and there's not a good reason for that, then we should be providing that information to the board and saying, here's extra money that hasn't been spent for the last couple of years, and we recommend that you reevaluate this.
I have something to say too. One of the main reasons for this too was because there's no accountability right now. You can write basically anything on your quarterly reports, and we filled the position, but there's no person in that position. It might be filled in from, an hour from this one and an hour from that one, and it's not getting the full time that it's being paid for. And so that's why, this one has been brought forward, just basically for more accountability.
Yeah, thank you for having that on there. Okay. Glenn, do you want to go to the next one?
Any other questions, or? So do you want to just go through them all and then vote on them, or do you want to vote on them individually, or how do you want to handle that?
I don't know. What do you want to do?
Okay.
I'd like to vote on them individually as we go through,
Okay.
because then the conversation is fresh on the
Okay.
topic, and we don't have to try to refer to our memory.
Okay, so on recommendation number 1, should we go there first? Okay.
Yes, but what's complex about this is, we have a sentence that encompasses this recommendation. And so I think, realistically, what we should do is have this recommendation move forward for essentially further discussion or further work to kind of vet out how the specific language is going to be, how we're going to, how the quarterly report's going to be revamped. And so we know exactly what we're approving, so to speak, in the long term. Does that make sense? Because right
Right.
now it's just a sentence. How do we incorporate
So,
that?
like, maybe just say, we think this is a good recommendation, but all of these will be vetted at a later date, another meeting. We can't do that all today.
Yeah, I would say that's inherent because we're
Yeah.
making a recommendation. Once those are done or agreed on, then the work would start and that would be through staff.
So we could do thumbs up or thumbs down on each one, right?
Could I offer a
Sure.
potential action? It could just be to direct staff to include on the application and the quarterly reports to be adopted at your next meeting. So I could bring an example of what that would look like. You guys, this committee could approve it from there.
I like that. Is that okay with that? Yeah. So we'll just do a thumbs up or thumbs down on each one as we go, or do you want to just say in general, we're gonna?
I'm not seeing any disagreement
Okay.
here. If we do votes on each of these recommendations, we need to go out to public comment
Right.
for each one. So I would recommend, if we're not seeing much disagreement, that we make a motion to adopt whichever recommendations we have a lot of agreement on, and then come back for a second vote on the ones where there
Okay,
might be
so
some
maybe at the
more
end, just say
conversation.
we agree on all of them, or all but number, whatever.
That,
Right.
to me, that would be an easier
Okay, and
process,
faster.
yeah.
Okay. Well,
Before we vote on recommendation number one, I do have one final comment I would like to chime in there on, and this is something for the ad hoc committee to consider as they're figuring out how to implement it, which is consideration of a new section in our agenda that we would have when the committee meets for the first time in a new fiscal year, where the committee would review and provide comments on the quarterly reports that have been submitted, so that way it becomes part of what this Measure Z committee actually does.
You mean like comment on each one and vote on each one? Is that what you're saying? On each quarterly report?
Not necessarily on each one, but allows the committee as a whole to take an action that we've received these. We find perhaps there may be some troubling issues within them that we're presenting forward to the board, that this is what the oversight of the Measure Z committee is doing. We have received these, and there needs to be a way to communicate that to the board.
Go ahead, John.
So if you remember, in the fall of this year, I believe in October, we met as a committee to look at the activity from the prior year, but we also had agencies come in who received funding in the past, and they reported to your committee on the activities that they were doing, and this committee was able to engage with them and ask them questions. We are planning to do that again this year, and at that meeting, that would seem to be the time when we are looking to review the prior activities that these agencies have taken on, and at that meeting, I believe we can
Yeah.
definitely include in the quarterly reports. I believe that was in
Yeah,
those,
and
the
we
October and
chose who
November.
we wanted, people that we had concerns about, they came in and we asked them questions in October. I think that's exactly what you're saying. It's just, because if we bring it and then pick out the ones, then we have to have another meeting to bring them back in. So I think just us letting Sean know, I think I would like to hear from, blah, blah, blah. That way, that's what we did last year, and I thought everybody felt pretty good about the process.
I'm just not sure how that communication then is being reflected back to the board about.
Well, it's in our minutes, it's in our activity, they hopefully will read all of our materials. So, did you want to say something?
Yes, I have one more question. When the quarterly reports come in and they're reviewed, I mean, do you have the staff and are they going to actually be reviewed and rejected if they don't follow that? Or how is that process going to work?
It's a good question. The reports that come in, I would say, require some staff time to take a look at and inspect and review, and that gets we try to look at everyone that comes in, but they'll get inspected and reviewed as kind of staff time allows. So if there are complaints that we receive, we'll make sure to distribute those quarterly reports to this committee, so to provide more eyes on it. And if there are questions that the committee has on those quarterly reports, feel free to send them to staff so that we can zero in on specific applications and quarterly reports.
I just would like to say too, in talking to Sean in the past and other people in his position, that these quarterly reports, for some agencies that have received the money for a while, they just become, like if you read them, it's like they just copied off of the previous month because they assign it to somebody, like a clerk or somebody, and they say, here, fill out this report. And so they just go, okay, and they just do that. So I think that if we ask the agencies to be more accountable for specifics and say, we're going to read these, and it's going to come back on you if it's not right, or if it looks exactly like the other one, only with a different date, then they're going to be paying more attention to what's going on. I think that would be helpful. Even if you just did that, because I'm sure when you call people, you say, this looks a little hinky, and they go, oh, I was busy and I had Joe Blow fill it out. And not that they want to be disrespectful or irresponsible. I just think it has become just a rote kind of thing. And so if we really make sure and clear that they're going to, that these are going to be well written, well thought out, and that we know what's going on, and they're going to be held accountable, then we're going to have less and less of that, I think. I would hope. So.
You want to move on to recommendation 2?
Just a point of
Yeah, I
clarity.
think we did.
There was earlier discussion saying that there was a desire of the committee to vote on each individual one, and then I think I heard you ask to aggregate them. And
Yeah.
I'm just not clear which direction we're taking.
That's what we're going to do. We're just going to aggregate them and turn
Okay.
them back to him, and then he's going to, reflect that in his report. I think
Okay.
so.
Okay, number 2 is the one I spoke to initially out of order. Basically, what happened in this case is the application would include a new document that would require documentation of the components of the personnel costs that were requested by the applicant, so that we could bring some consistency from application to application, agency to agency. So again, we're trying to put as much of the work product, if you will, on the applicant, not the county staff. But this would require the creation of a new application document, and it would be position by position. If you're asking for a patrol
XYZ.
deputy, and you're asking for a correction officer, and you're asking for a public liaison of the community, each one of those would have to complete that profile document, if you will, that characterizes the components that you're asking for, and making sure they're consistent with the criteria the committee had established as far as it being compensable.
Right, and that goes along with not just,
Yeah.
go ahead, Sean.
So my assumption is this is related to the whole salary and roll-ups question, that's the variation we've seen.
Yes.
So would we be taking a recommendation position on what is going to be acceptable to us or not, i.e. just base salary?
Well, I think my suggestion would be that in our motion that we specify that we'd ask the staff to come back to us with a proposed document that would be in addition to the application, saying the CEO's office recommends that you include these components. And then we could discuss whether we think we want to add or subtract from that list.
Go ahead, Sean.
And
The goal wasn't just to limit it to just the base salary, just to bring consistency to the process.
Okay, Sean, go ahead.
And to be clear, I can come back to this committee with any with a recommendation. I need direction from this committee first about the nature of the types of things that you are looking for. You are all involved in pursuing your own funding and have done reporting in the past and are familiar with funding streams that have strings attached and allowable costs that you are required to report to other agencies. And if there are models that you find particularly effective, please let me know about those things so that I can model what I'm going to make after something that you all are looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't want to come up with something on my
Don't
own
reinvent
because this
it.
is not the CIO's advisory committee. This is
Right.
the Citizens Advisory Committee.
Right, okay.
Ginger, I have my take on what we were doing on this one was not to eliminate any of the retirement or the, the actual cost of an employee, but it was to eliminate the, like the applications that has an employee and this employee needs a copy machine and paper and internet and all of that, additional stuff all thrown into one application. That kind of stuff is the kind of stuff that we were talking about, whether that was allowable or not allowable.
Okay.
And I would also like to echo Tammy's
Okay.
statement. I really felt that part of this also, one part was defining an equal playing field for evaluating the position expenses, but also looking at the applications as a whole. As we've moved forward, there are a lot of applications that are asking for pretty much full funding of their programs. And I think it's important for us as a committee to have a discussion that says, what is the purview of Measure Z in that situation? Should we be funding programs completely? Should we be funding positions? Should we be funding equipment? And to get greater definition about what expenses that we want to prioritize.
Right, and in the past, people have come to us and asked for us to pay for the director position of their agency. And when asked, what if you don't get this? Then they say, well, then we have to close. And so that's not what we're about. We can't just fund that agency because of that. So, okay, go ahead. Glenn, do you want to go to
Okay.
number 3?
So number 3 is create a reserve policy. As we've seen, the flow of money that we label as one-time money, which is usually the unexpended accumulation that occurs based on either the inability of the applicant to complete the task that was outlined, or more often than not, just the inability to fill a personnel position, results in the accumulation of monies throughout the year. And by mid-year, the county has a pretty good idea of, which positions are probably not going to be staffed in that current year and so on. So that's created a fund that then the Board of Supervisors has used historically to go back and go deeper into the list. One of the problems we're facing now is that, unfortunately, the last time around, the county took what essentially was 3 years accumulation, or let's say money that was derivative from probably generally a 3-year period, and they pushed it into the application process and went way, way down. So what the concept of this reserve policy would be, and I'll give an example, and it's only illustrative, it's not the ad hoc's desire. Say we were to adopt a policy saying, these one-time monies, even though they're relatively recurrent, we're calling them one-time because they're not guaranteed in any particular year. The one-time money should go into a reserve fund. And just as an example, maybe the committee would take the posture that in the subsequent year, we should not recommend more than 1/3 of that fund be expended in that current year. The idea being basically to try to blend out and take the peaks and valleys off of the application of the one-time money. It would give us some flexibility year to year, and it would also try to insulate us to some degree from an unusual circumstance like we faced in 22-23 when the Board of Supervisors allocated almost $4 million way deep in the list. Most people, I think, today believe that it would have been prudent to take a percentage of that money, hold it out, and then use it to, like I said, dampen the fluctuations over a longer time period. So the goal here is to take essentially the unexpended and recouped salary money from vacant positions, put it into a specific reserve fund, and then develop a policy saying the committee shall not recommend in any given year the expenditure of more than, and fill in the blank, of that particular reserve fund to try to level out the process.
Can we do that, Sean? Is that-
For this committee, I think that it would be prudent to look at a target. How much money do you want to have in reserves, and when do you want to get there by? And then I can come back to this committee with the process to get there. Like I said in this staff report, 15 to 20% of ongoing revenue is a best practice for reserve
So is
policy
that
level.
something that you would want us to vote on today?
Yes.
Okay. Billy?
And then as far as the percentage, is that on an average of the projected revenue, or is it just like every year we want to just target what we expect that next year to be?
So this year, we're at $12.6 million is our projected revenue, so our policy level would be 15 to 60, it would be, my proposal would be 16% of the ongoing revenue, so 16% of $12.6 million
Would go into reserves?
would go into reserve.
Okay, yeah, my understanding of this was one-time funding would be where we would pull the reserve amount from. And so that's not what I'm hearing you say. Or am I misunderstanding?
So that's how you would get to, that's how you would build up your reserve fund. Likely would be to use one-time funding, right? Any money that comes in above projections or money that's unspent from the prior year would be put into a separate fund. You would still have your $12.6 million available and for allocation. And if for some reason you don't hit that mark, then you could pull from this other pot of funding.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
So are there any questions on that?
I just point of conversation, I think 15 to 16% in our context is pretty ambitious. I think functionality, if we can even achieve 10%, it would be a huge improvement from where we stand now. And trying to craft that over a 4-year, 5-year period would allow it to be a little more achievable rather than say we want to do this by, 24, 25 or something like that. And just as a way of making it a smaller contribution or a smaller effect each year rather than taking away from the resources that we can turn into services.
So you're talking about a percentage from the total, not from what we get to allocate, right?
Yeah, we're just talking about setting an amount that we want to put into a separate
Okay.
savings account.
Okay. Did you want to say something to that?
No, just like I
Okay.
said,
So
what's the total amount
does
and when do
somebody
you want
want
to
to
get
make a
there?
motion?
I want to make one more comment.
Oh.
To make sure that I'm understanding this, you're not taking, you're talking about extra money that hasn't been spent, that will be put into a reserve. Okay,
Correct.
but I also don't think that we can talk about building up to 16%, because if we have, within a certain amount of years, because if we have 3 good years and then we have one, year that drops, we're going to have to draw from that, and it's going to take that percentage down. So I think that needs to be put in there to where, like it has to you don't have to maintain 16% or get to 16%. It's to be used on low years, taken from the high years, used on the low years.
So in essence, that percentage discussion becomes more about a goal rather than a minimum threshold.
Would somebody like to make a motion on this? Either 10, 16, whatever. Yeah.
I'll move that we make a recommendation to require or recommend that there would be a 16% reserve fund established for all monies that are not spent in the prior fiscal year to roll into this fund until the 16% is achieved. And then that money can be utilized in years that it is needed.
Okay.
Let me ask a clarification question. So are you saying that in 5 years, we're at 14% and we have a really low year that we can't use any of that until we get to the 16?
So it's a discretionary fund, and so the board can use it, every year if they see fit, essentially. But it's just a goal, just like our current revenue funds or our, you know, whatever it's called, emergency funding is about. They can always tap into that if there's a need to fill one of the vital positions.
Okay.
Is there any more discussion? Is there a second?
Another point of clarification. So the idea would be when the committee comes forward with a list of projects 1 through X to be funded, there would then be essentially a note at the bottom that we recommend filling as many or approving as many projects as the board can up to this particular threshold. And that would be the recommendation the committee would be moving forward with each year.
I would just say that we do business as usual. So we have $12.2 million to allocate every year. That would be our, whatever the projections will be, we'll allocate that $12.2 million. If, when we allocate that $12.2 million, there's people that don't, or the organizations don't spend that money, then it would roll into this contingency fund, because there may be years where we project $12.2 million and it actually is only $11 million of revenue that comes in. Those are the years where we would have to draw, you know, from that contingency fund in order to meet our obligations. Or there may be a year where, you know, there's a project or an ongoing project that we'd like to continue funding, and we can recommend to the board that even though we don't have the money, they can dip into this contingency fund to fund, you know, this project or this position. Does that make sense?
Okay, so we have a
I'll
motion.
second.
Okay. So, can I,
You want to go out to
any
public comment?
public comment? No, anybody from the audience? No? Okay, so should we call for the vote?
Sure.
Roll call?
Ms. Trent?
Yes.
Vice Chair Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Zemer?
Yes.
Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Sheriff?
Yes.
Mr. Ronco?
Yes.
Mr. Cole?
Yes.
All right.
Glenn, do you want to do number 4?
Okay, recommendation 4 is that the committee recommend a process whereby we could consider partial funding of applications. As you know, historically, we have tried not to do this, basically because we didn't want to try to get in and from an external position, nitpick somebody's application and so on. If the application was presumed to have merit, then we essentially took the applicant at their word that it was necessary to fund all of the components of the application. Given the fiscal circumstances that we face now, we think it's appropriate that the committee change that posture, and on occasion, based on the application specifics, have a policy that we can at least consider partial funding of an application.
I think that your recommendations, like for, 1 and 2, and, already will cover that by the application process, which is good. That we have something to look at, and we can view it. And I don't think we have a policy that we don't, right? We don't have a policy that we can't ask them to reduce.
Not a formal policy. We've had a practice. Maybe
Yeah.
that'd be a better word. Our practice has been not to do that. But this would explicitly state that the committee's option exists to partially fund an application.
So I have a good understanding of what that means, but through your committee, did you discuss what the kind of action of that would look like? Can you just kind of walk us through that?
Probably the best thing I can do is, give you an example. And there are certain applications that you can tell inherently that without total funding of the application, that process is not going to be functional. You can't have 1.5 of anything, obviously, and so on. So the goal of this would be to say, take a particular application and say there are 3 components. And the 3 are not, they're related, but they're not interrelated in such a way that the lack of number 4 makes number 3, 2, and 1 not functional. So that's the kind of circumstance when we envisioned we would take a look and say, based on our funding shortfalls and so on, it appears to us that your application will still be 85% functional if you got funding for elements 1, 2, and 3, but weren't able to fund element 4 recognizing that not funding 4 doesn't put 1, 2, and 3 in an impossible situation to accomplish anything. It'll be very application specific, and there are some that will not fit this criteria at all. There are some where you clearly need this much money to make this thing run. There are some, a fair number, looking back to the historic ones, where I think we could have said, we will fund 75% of it, and you will have 90% functionality at 75% funding. You know, so that's the kind of circumstance we're trying to deal with.
And were you thinking that it would be up to the agency themselves to pull number 4, number 3, number 2, number 1? I mean, you wouldn't tell them where to do it.
In my mind, I'm speaking for myself as one individual, I think when we do the initial review of the applications and so on, I would go through and I would mark one of them and say, I think application 14 has the capability for partial funding. I think elements 5, 6, and 7 could not be funded, and it still would be a functional program. So I think that's the responsibility of the committee members. And then we could communicate with that applicant saying, we perceive that we could eliminate element 4 and the majority of your program would still be functional. Do you agree, or have we missed something in our review of your process so that you need all 4 elements?
Yeah, okay.
And I think as further point of view to describe process, I would see this as another step in that process that we use. Yes, no, does this application fit the measure? The follow-up question is this application a candidate for partial funding? At which point the committee would vote. And if it is, then it becomes part of the discussion. We come back to it, we discuss as a committee what partial funding of this application would look like in an effort to form consensus. And then if it is voted not a candidate for partial funding, it would be assumed as reviewed in whole.
I agree with those because there's a lot of things in the application that actually don't even fit into the tax measure. I'll go back to using, just if somebody said they needed this job, but they also need a copy machine to go with it. Okay, that obviously is part that, you know, this committee should not be funding. Or and even like if it was an officer and they asked for a weapon, you don't have to do that weapon. They should be able to get that, you know, that themselves. But, you know, to do you can't take out part of, like if you're going to do the officer, you can't take out his retirement because they can't have that officer without all of those, you know, those funding. So there's, you know, you kind of have to look at, see what can be taken out, what can't. But there are things like, you know, that have been asked for before, paper machines, paper, you know, stuff like this that really don't qualify. And those are the kind of things that we're talking about we shouldn't be funding.
All right.
Okay. Number 5 is require agencies to report on other funding sources that they have pursued to replace Measure Z. As you may recall, we've historically asked agencies to state on the application if there are alternative funding sources, and the routine answer is no. This would try to strengthen the concept of saying, if you're going to be a successful applicant, you have to be actively looking for alternative sources of revenue. This was not necessarily intended to be a lifelong funding mechanism for these projects and so on. In fact, in the initial discussions the first year, we talked very specifically with applicants about saying, we would like to consider funding this for 2 years or 3 years. We would like you to move to another model by the time you reach the 4th year. Unfortunately, the default answer, like I said, is they're always going to say, I've looked at grants and so on. So this would try to put a little more onus on the applicant to specify and actually literally go looking for alternative funding sources. I don't know, quite frankly, how successful it will be, but the idea is to plant the seed in the applicant's mind that they should not be considering Measure Z to be a lifelong funding measure. They should, in fact, be actively pursuing other funding mechanisms.
And also, I know, because I talk to a lot of the agencies, because I think that's important for us to be in touch. And I know people say, well, I did apply for a grant, we just haven't heard yet, but it's a $2 million grant. But if we don't get it, we need this money. I'm like, well, if you get it, are you going to give the money back? And then they're going, well, I don't know, you know, we can always use it. No, you know, I mean, something needs to be clarified that if you're asking for money from somewhere else for that particular position and it's on its way, that maybe an agreement can be made that if you receive that funding, you need to give us back that money. I don't know if we can do that, but
I
when
think it also needs to say, instead of just pursuing it, it needs to also say grants that you have received or monies that you have received for this
for this position,
because
Yeah.
there's no thing in here where you have to report. So you may be getting two different, grants that pay in for the same position, and you have way more than what you need for the, or
Right.
thing. So you need to report on all the money that you receive.
And when
I can see the application having a sentence where it says, please, describe or delineate all efforts you've made in the prior fiscal year and the current fiscal year to fund this, application with an alternative source. And that way they have a very distinct time frame. If they've made application to XYZ grant organization, we can see if they're doing their due diligence, so to speak.
Well, and in the past, when I've seen in the paper, this agency got this huge grant, and they don't want to hear me calling, but I always do. I go, hey, I said, great, congratulations, When do we get our check back? Oh, well, and there's no reason they have to. I mean, at this point, there's no obligation. And I think a sentence saying, should you receive money for this position? I don't know how you'd say you have to give it back, but, something like that.
I'd like to add, where I'm coming from on this one is really reviewing how I view this fund after the sunset clause was removed. It changed the tone of the fund. And so agencies that had been accessing this opportunity prior to that time and then after that time had access to resources in a way that provided stability for them. But I don't feel this fund was intended to permanently support programs. I felt it was intended to provide service and to develop service so that it could be sustained long-term through more traditional funding lines. And so I'm very uncomfortable when we have repeat applications year after year that are not looking for other solutions. And I think this is a change in tone that says we expect that.
Okay. Number 6.
Should we be asking for a public comment at this point, or are you going to do that in the end?
No, I'm not hearing any significant
No.
Okay.
disagreement with either of these. We made a motion on recommendation number 3 around the policy, creating a reserve policy, but
Okay.
at this point, I believe later on we can make one motion to encompass.
Okay. Recommendation 6 then is adopt a stance that the committee will not recommend any more county positions be funded with Measure Z. As you're aware, the difficulties we face now are partially derivative of the rollover of one-time funded positions with the excess money into the automatically refunded positions and so on. So given the preponderance of the fact, or preponderance of the money is already going a substantial between 67 and 78%, depending on what you use for your benchmark figure, we don't think that the fund should in the future fund any additional county positions that are not currently funded. So this is a departure from our pattern in the past, but we feel that, I think the ad hoc feels it's necessary given the fiscal realities that we need to keep a diversity of applications and diversity of programs in the community to maintain the community support and quite frankly, just to kind of keep our word to the community that we would be a funder of a diverse and varied set of applications.
I'd like to add this speaks partially to my opinion that the mission of Measure Z extends beyond the abilities of the county agencies alone. It requires partnerships with outside agencies to fulfill the services that are its mission. And in that, I hope that we can continue to support those aspects of Measure Z as a priority, as well as the internal county roles.
Yeah, thank you. I totally understand the reason why this recommendation is here. I fully understand that. However, I can't recommend this because we just don't know what the future is going to hold. This year, financially, our county is looking to pull back a lot, and to try and salvage as many positions as possible. And then next year, next budget year, we don't know. There may be a need for several county departments to come to Measure Z as a potential revenue source to make sure that we don't lay off positions next year. And so we could, take a stance of discouraging county departments from applying for Measure Z funds and make that as a recommendation of a discouraging. But I don't think this committee should say that that we recommend that we would not recommend any future county positions, because we just don't know financially where our county is going to be next year. And though I understand fully, Nick, that Measure Z has provided so many avenues to provide programs and public safety and fire services and a lot of great programs throughout this county, including municipalities. But this is, again, a county tax. And so the county's got to make sure that we can function and provide all the services to the county residents that we are obligated to do. And so we may be at the point where we need to tap more into this in the future. And so I can't support that recommendation, but I fully understand why it's there.
Can I make a comment on that? Could it be you're talking about like in the down years when there's not a lot, but so if it was something like that, could it go in that say, okay, any county positions that are recommended are a one-time, or a 1 year, and then we'll reevaluate. So it doesn't automatically go into funding. It has to come back to the committee for recommendation for the following year, because then if the revenue has gone up, that position can be moved back to the general fund and not out of the Measure Z fund.
I'd like to add in as part of that, and I'm sorry to hop in, but because it's so close. That description of one-time funding, I think really cuts to the intent of this line item. Because historically, anytime this committee approved a county position, it would be shifted to an ongoing obligation. And that, changing that pattern, I believe, is the intention that we're having. So describing it as one-time funding, yes, they can. I think they should be able to make an application. And then the committee would review that application with the same weight as every other application that we are looking at. And then allow that process to continue. But I really want to see us as a committee being able to not recommend ongoing positions being added to that side of the budget.
Well said.
I could say on there as well that, to one-time funds, one-time monies allowable for that specific application for any county department to avoid layoffs. That may be also the language that could be used.
Did you want to include and change the wording a little bit to say that we would discourage departments from asking for Measure Z money if they have other sources? Is that what you had said that?
Yes, I mean, that could be definitely a stance, but to say blanket that we would not recommend any county positions.
So maybe just change that sentence. That's up to your committee.
Just a couple of points. I very much respect the sheriff's position, and I want to say that up front. But I would point out that if the county positions that were originally approved had all been filled by now, the county's salary would have overwhelmed the totality of it. So when you say it might be necessary to go back to fund a tough situation, the county's existing authorized positions, let's call them that, would already overtake the totality of the fund. So if it were not for the vacancies, you'd already be over-expending the Measure Z fund. So I am a little dubious of the concept that in tough times, we can go a little deeper into the fund. You're already expending 110 or 115% if all of the allocated positions were in fact filled. So I'm confused about how you see additional funding capability existing when you're already overtopping the levy,
Well, it's going to be up to the Board of Supervisors, essentially, because they're going to have to make a determination of where they are going to spend the money over the next 2 years. And we are facing layoffs. That's the reality of it. And so they're going to have to prioritize really what our obligations are within the county. And they may have to choose, including Measure Z money, of how that money is spent and allocated to make sure that we are fulfilling our obligations. So,
And you're not just talking about the sheriff's department, you're talking about county agencies like the DAs and everybody.
probation.
Yeah, so you're not
roads,
just
yes.
talking about you.
No,
It's not
absolutely.
about you, yeah, okay.
I can kind of understand that, as long as it's put into one-time funding, because if you have a choice of laying off a job that's definitely needed, or buying a new car for something, you're definitely going to want to go to keeping that position, and where that job is definitely needed, and that car can wait another year.
Okay. Thanks.
So it sounds like this particular recommendation might require some modification or a separate vote. So at this point, I would ask that somebody on the committee make a motion that we adopt recommendations 1, 2, 4, and 5, because we've already adopted recommendation number 3. Some of these recommendations will require that staff bring back a proposal to your committee to adopt the specifics of those recommendations. So I would ask for a motion to adopt recommendations 1, 2, 4, and 5 before we continue with the rest of the discussion.
I move we move recommendations 1, 2, 4, and 5 for approval.
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Is there any public comments? Okay, is there anybody in the audience? Tom?
Yeah, Tom Batson, Director of Public Works for the county. I have concerns about number 4. I request that you take your time in developing that criteria and have specific criteria. What's happened to Public Works in the past is we were asked for voluntary reductions, we gave it, and then the money went to lower ranked projects instead of coming back when there was enough money to fully fund what we'd asked for the first time. That's why I didn't reduce my ask last time, even though it got nowhere, it was not gonna get anywhere near it. I'm more than willing to look at the other applications when you've gone through, but to ask people or to pick out at the committee level, you mentioned copy machines. Well, this is a general tax, and you may not want to pay for them, but it actually does qualify. That is a fact. So if you want to put a criteria that says these are the certain things that we will not fund or will lower your ranking, that's one way to do it where you can get around without cherry picking separate things. We'll lower your ranking if you apply for these non-personnel things. You'll get more ranking if you show us a match. Take your time on this one. This can be a very slippery slope to just make a blanket policy without looking deeply into how it will affect the applications. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Is there any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion on the floor and a second. Do you want to do roll call?
Sure. Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Mr. Bronco?
Yes.
Sheriff?
Yes.
Chief Robertson?
Yes.
Mr. Zemer?
Yes.
Vice Chair Campbell?
Yes.
And Ms. Trent?
Yes.
Oh, and I see, it looks like, I see Darcy has joined the meeting. How do we handle this?
Ask her where she came into the meeting.
I would actually turn to maybe the clerk of the board. I don't know, Nikki, if you have any suggestions on how we might handle this. It appears that a member of our committee has joined remotely. I mentioned at the top of the meeting that Ms. Miller was going to be joining remotely, and it looks like she has done that at some point in this meeting.
May I speak?
Yes.
Yeah.
You need-
Yes,
you need to
yes, of
recognize
course.
Yeah.
Yes, Darcy, please.
I was listening in, and I vote yes as well.
Okay, Darcy, do you know when you joined our meeting? We need to know that.
When you were talking about the money that, not the money, but the plan on how we're going to deal with, how would I say this? Setting priorities, I guess, for, we were talking about the sheriff's department. We were also talking about, there was a grant or something that was received, and there was a question asked about the grant, and that's when I came in.
Okay. I don't know.
So for potential clarity, it may have been a conversation regarding the search for other funding sources by applicants?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. So at this point, it appears that Ms. Miller has joined remotely. To include Ms. Miller in this discussion, a couple things need to happen. We need to know approximately when, Darcy, you joined. Wasn't monitoring. I didn't see when you
She said,
joined.
yeah. When we were discussing grants, people that apply for grants, and then so it was one of our
So around
recommendations.
recommendation number 5.
Yeah.
Okay. So then it will take an action of this committee to allow Ms. Miller into this meeting to take part as a committee member. And if that happens, Ms. Miller, you'll need to state the reason for participating remotely, and you'll need to verify whether you are alone in where you are. And I believe that should satisfy the requirements of AB 2449.
Does it require a vote to
Yes.
have it? We have a first and a second on the table. So should we vote on that first and then?
So right now, I did record the votes for, it was 7-0 to adopt those recommendations. It would be up to your committee to determine if you want to revote that recommendation. But that action has been completed there.
I think we should just take it as completed at that point. Yeah.
But I would move that we include Darcy in the discussion for discussions moving forward.
Second.
Okay. Is there any comment from the public? Any comment from the audience? Okay.
Okay. Well, she just has to answer the questions that she.
Oh, I thought she just, okay.
All right.
So do you want to
Okay.
ask?
The reason I am conferencing in is because I'm on travel for my work. I am here alone in a room, and I was trying to do a video on here, but it wasn't allowing me. Excuse me, it wasn't allowing me to do it. Let me see. If you can see me. Oh, here I am. See me?
Okay, great. Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. Now we can do a roll call.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Mr. Bronco?
Yes.
Sheriff?
Yes.
Mr. Chief Robertson?
Yes.
Mr. Zemer?
Yes.
Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
And Ms. Trent?
Yes.
Okay, passes 7-0. Welcome to the meeting, Darcy.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to recommendation number 7, that the committee establish a target of 67% of the ongoing revenue to be allocated each year to the county departments, with the goal having been achieved or trying to be achieved by fiscal year 26-27. If you look through the attached staff report, you can see a year-by-year analysis of what's gone to the county agencies and what's gone to external agencies. That percentage floats a little bit because, as Sean pointed out, it depends on whether you consider the quote-unquote available revenue that was dispersed initially or recommended initially by the committee, or whether you consider that amount plus the amount that was recouped mid-year or later in the year as a result of under expenditures by the other applicants. But the 67% represents probably a midline of the county's receipt of the funds over the past 6 fiscal periods. So the committee's suggestion is that we develop a policy of establishing that split as a goal, and then work with both the Board of Supervisors and the CEO's office to develop a specific process whereby we would ultimately try to achieve that goal to ensure that there are still some discretionary funding available for the external applicants.
Did the committee discuss, the ad hoc committee, my mistake, discuss any of the other applicants having a similar thing, specifically the Fire Chiefs Association having a target of 20%?
We did not.
I'd like consideration of that as that entity becoming part of the internal discussion.
Okay, Bob?
2 comments on this one. The first one is it the expectation that if certain allocation amounts are made to different departments, that then the departments would still need to submit very specific applications for consideration and approval by the Measure Z committee? And then the second one is when you start looking at the historical trends of how different departments have been funded over time, some departments may not have gotten any funding on one given year. Other departments may have been generously funded on different years. So how is there a certain amount of equity put in there to figure out what that balance might be? Similar to what Shauna's mentioning, that how does all that fit in there and create a working program?
The goal of this particular suggestion is to establish a target for an internal-external split, okay? To answer specifically your question about the internal county departments, the ad hoc committee did not get into the process, nor do I think we want to, of looking at the internal county layout. I am in no position to judge where the sheriff's 13th correctional officer is more valuable than the 6th probation officer. That's not, I think, a responsibility that this committee has. We did say that establishing a split along the historic lines of our practice is desirable for a couple of reasons. The first being that, number one, in the meetings with the department heads, every department head was in favor of a process that locked in a relative target for them that gives them some consistency in their staffing capability and so on. They did not want to see the committee, authorizing a whole bunch of money for X department this year and less money the next year and so on. We felt that that's an appropriate process within the county's structure through the CEO's office of their budget recommendations and the Board of Supervisors and the existing county budget development process that takes place. So we did not have a desire to insert ourselves, into that component. We do believe that the partnerships that have been established and the services that are provided by the external entities should be considered equally valuable to the community. And they've largely been considered on merit by the committee historically. And we think that's a valuable component of the public trust aspect of this. So our goal is not to tinker in the internal composition of the internal elements of it. Let the county budget process and the CEO and the Board of Supervisors deal with that. We are trying to establish the fact that there will always be some external money available and available for discretionary allocation by this committee, because without that declaration, it's very clear that the county will overtop the fund and the process that we have gone through historically will be moot.
What I would like to add is, within this description, this to me is us defining that those external partnerships are have a place within this fund, and this is how we craft space for them to participate. And this is not getting into say that Eureka gets 5% or Fortuna gets 3% or anything like that. This is creating stability within the process that we have already been using, so that it can continue to be available to other members of the community perhaps agencies that have not yet received funding, so that there is an opportunity for either new programs or continued programs that would not be able to receive support if we do not take action.
I understand, again, the need. You all have different representatives, or you're representing different, districts and different needs in our community, and so, but I just want to, point out that, again, this is a county tax. This is a county tax for county services, along with fire and ambulance and roads. That's what this initiative was passed on, and so. There is nothing in the ballot language that says this goes to the cities and this goes to different programs. This is, again, essentially a county tax. I think this committee is overstepping by establishing a target of 67% or any percentage rate for county funding, when in reality, over the next couple of years, it is going to be a very difficult time financially for the county. And so I do not want to restrict the county's ability to temporarily suspend Measure Z funding outside, because, to ensure county programs, would continue over the next couple budget cycles, because it may be a recommendation that we give the committee next year, or the committee makes next year, to make sure that county programs do continue temporarily for a year. And just to come back, for the next year, if there's actually higher revenues or whatnot to some of those outside sources. But to say that that the county can only spend 67% on their programs, I think, again, this is something that we should not recommend. I do not support this. I do support fire in this, and if there's some way to allocate money towards fire every year, I would definitely recommend that, because right now there isn't a consistent revenue stream for county fire departments to receive funding. But I don't necessarily know what that percentage would be, but I definitely would highly prioritize fire being a priority for this committee.
Do you have anything you want to add? Okay. We need a moment to think. Okay. So this is probably not going to require a vote, or do you think?
Recommendations number 6 and 7 would require a vote, or you can take no action. These are recommendations from the ad hoc committee. This committee can choose to continue pursuing its historical practices, or you can choose to modify. We've talked about modifying recommendation number 6 to allow the one-time funding to be used for county staffing on a one-time basis to prevent layoffs. That could be a potential modification for recommendation number 6. Your committee could look to discuss more around recommendation number 7, or you can choose to take a vote on it, or you can choose to leave it alone. You can choose to also go out to public comment as well.
Glenn?
Just to try to bring some clarity to the process, I would move that the committee adopt recommendation number 6, adopting a stance that the committee not recommend any more county positions be funded with Measure Z.
I would second.
Okay, is there any discussion, any public discussion?
Does that mean not even for one time? Like if it's a low year, that you can't fund them for just that 1 year and it's done at the end of that year?
The way the motion is stated, it would prohibit, in fact, additional county positions.
Okay.
Or that's the intent of the process.
Not even for 1 year? Okay.
So is there any discussion from the public? Is there any discussion again from the committee? Okay, Sean?
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, Tom, sorry.
Good morning, Tom Matson, Director of Public Works for the County of Humboldt. I would actually oppose this one simply because unlike Billy, looking at the downside, I'm looking at the upside. If we get Nordic fish farms, we get wind farms, we're building windmills, our economy is going to go up, 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 up. And the county should not be locked into what they have right now. If we need more positions in the future, if that revenue is there, maybe a situation of only X amount. And I'll talk about this in your next position, but X amount could be used for salaries, a percentage of the total or something like that. That allows the county to grow as the economy grows. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, my comment is these are the two recommendations. I assume we all expect it to be a bit more challenging, but they're also, for me, the kernel of the problem. We can say it's a county tax, and I really appreciate your perspectives, and I understand that. But I don't think the intent of the tax was for it to be completely taken over by county services per se. And I think the struggle for the committee is any kind of mechanism to deal with that, even philosophically. I definitely understand a hard prohibition sounds absolute. I don't read the language that way, but yeah, I think this needs more discussion. I think some of the mechanisms that staff is working on would be good to bring back. But yeah, I just wanted to say that these are the kernel of the problem that we are all meeting again today, and why we wanted an ad hoc committee, and so their recommendations should be very well considered, and I think they both have merit, but having a nuanced discussion with specifically the sheriff as the county representative, so to speak, is important. I am curious, though, since we have a process for voting on certain of these recommendations, do we have to have complete consensus on any recommendation to move forward? So if
No, each of these recommendations could be adopted by majority.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Well,
I too am concerned about this potentially hamstring the committee's ability to deal with things in the future. We don't have an accurate crystal ball to know what the future holds, and such policies could be detrimental to things that need to be accomplished in the future by us or our successors. Likewise, there are issues with the need for one-time funding that may come up to play that are critical. And then the last item on this is, I'm losing my train of thought on here. My mind went blank. I'll let someone else speak.
wait, just a minute. Did you?
I'd like to speak to that really quick. I do appreciate the optimism of the potential for growth, and how does this affect our policies and our allocations in the face of growth, and I welcome that. That would be a fantastic problem to have. And so what I would say, though, is taking action on this item would not prevent us as a committee for taking more action in the future. We can always, as a committee, say we want to review this policy and make a change to this process in light of new information, and that's part of the strength of our group. So I think trying to project how this is going to impact during growth isn't necessarily the key component. I think this is coming to the key component of what is affecting our problems right now, and that's why I support this, even though I don't see it as a perfect fix. I see it as the action that would be needed to be taken now to help address our current situation.
I just want to say one thing, that when we vote on something and then it becomes the way it is, or whatever, we accept that. When it's time for the application process, at that moment, if we say, oh, we don't want to do that anymore, we have to wait for our next meeting to make the change. You can't, and that would interfere with what we're doing with the applications at that moment. And so we'd have to go, no, we can't do it this year. We'll have to think about it next year, because once we get those applications in February, March or something, then that's it. And this is on the books. So I don't think in the middle of us, doing our applications, we can just make a change, can we? I'm asking protocol.
I'm not quite.
Okay, go ahead, Billy.
So it has to be an agendized item.
Right.
For us to be able to take action
Right.
on it. So, and you're right, we may be reviewing something and it may be brought up in the committee that this, a county allocation was presented, but based upon the practice or the policy that we created, we're not going to accept that. We would have to agendize that
For the
particular
next meeting, yeah.
recommendation for the next meeting, and in order to accept that particular application.
Yeah, go ahead.
Again, I want to make my first comment. I totally respect the position of the county representatives here, and I don't want any of my comments to be construed to suggest that's not the case. I would point out, however, that even if we were to adopt these recommendations, the county's share of the fund is going to increase. Just the inflationary personnel costs on the county side are increasing by significant amounts, probably at least 5% in a lean year. And as an example, the law enforcement component increased by 25 to 30% based on the granting of the salary increases to the law enforcement represented agencies. Totally justified. I'm not talking about that side of the equation. I'm simply trying to take a hard look at the ledger and say, where will these numbers be in 5 years? 5 years from now, if we don't enact some changes, the county will definitely be overtopping the fund simply as a result of the inflationary costs of their personnel. So even if the number of positions are frozen, the total cost to support the county's operation will increase by, let's just say, I'm just saying 5% on average when you figure retirement, workers' comp, health insurance, all the other related benefits. That component is constantly creeping up, and in some cases advancing rapidly. So absent some of these, what seem to be more severe actions, we're just delaying the time frame in which there are no external funds any longer. And that's the reason I support this. I understand that they have harsh effects, but fiscal reality is fiscal reality, and I think we have to be aware of it as well as every other component of the process.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Bob.
I recall my train of thought, and it was getting back to the ranking process that the committee has, and that knowing in times like we're trending in now that the allocation of positions is something that would be probably by many of the committee members rank lower during these cycles, when clearly we're cognizant of the fund, the conditions that Glenn has raised, which is great that we're having the discussion that yes, the fund is reaching the point of essentially making the committee no longer necessary because there will be no funds to allocate. But that shouldn't stop us with the way that we go through and rank various projects for funding. We do have that ability to go ahead and as a committee rank ongoing obligations that would severely affect the viability of the fund lower than other sorts of applications that might be a one-time funding that's one and done and provides perhaps a greater benefit to the community.
Thank you. Can I call for the motion? I forget, what exactly was the motion?
So I have it, Mr. Zemer made the motion that the committee would adopt a stance that the committee will not recommend any more county positions to be funded with Measure Z. That is including one-time funding for, to prevent layoffs.
So that's number 6.
It's number 6.
Okay.
So
Can I make a comment on that before?
Oops, yeah, go ahead.
I would really like to see added to that for downtimes that the county could ask for a one-time, a cover year position to be covered if their, budget's got so much that they have to cut county staff. Not as a permanent, not, that transfers over, okay, that position is done this, so next year we're gonna do it. But just for maybe a bad year, because I would hate to see, I'll use the sheriff's department for example, I'd hate to see him lose 2 deputies, so somewhere in the county has no deputies, so we could fund this car, or so we could fund, something else. The county doesn't have another way to get funding where the outside departments, can put out a tax, or they can do some sort of raising. He is right, it is a county tax, but it is nice that we can, there's lots of, the fire department works the whole county. The drug task force officer works the whole county. So those are outside agencies, but they are working the whole county. So I consider, a lot of these inside the county, but I just don't like the idea of completely eliminating any ability to get any funding on a down year.
Well, in the description of number 6, it says this would not prohibit departments from applying for one-time funds. It already says that, but it's not in the motion.
No, but it doesn't say one-time funds for positions. What this motion says is no more county positions.
Okay.
So I think that the counties should be able to apply for the one-time, outside agencies can apply for one-time funding for positions. I think the county should be able to for 1 year also.
Do you want to add a friendly?
Are you proposing an amendment to the motion?
A friendly
I kind of
amendment.
sense you are. So if we added the word, adopt the stance that the committee will not recommend any more ongoing county positions, is that where you're trying to go?
Are you okay with
The maker would accept that amendment.
The second would accept that.
Okay. Is there any public discussion on the amendment?
We've already gone out for public comment.
Comment? No? Oh,
No,
on
we've
that.
already gone out for public comment. We can call for a vote.
Okay, well, let's call for a vote then.
Okay. Ms. Trent
Yes.
and Ms. Miller.
Yes.
Vice Chair Campbell.
Yes.
Mr. Robertson. Chief Robertson.
Yes.
Sheriff.
No.
Mr. Bronkel.
No.
And Mr. Cole.
Yes.
Mr. Zemer, did I?
I didn't hear.
Yes, Mr. Zemer, go
My
ahead.
hearing is
Sorry,
such that I
yeah,
wouldn't
no, I
debate
did,
it.
thank you. Mr. Zemer.
Yes.
All right, motion passes 6-2.
So are you asking for a vote on number 7 too?
I would like to make a motion to make a recommendation regarding number 7.
And that recommendation would,
To
Accept the rest.
support establishing a percentage of ongoing revenue be allocated each year to county departments to be achieved by 26-27 as a goal.
second.
To be clear, is that recommendation you said to establish a percentage, the recommendation is to establish a target of 67% of ongoing revenue. The staff report talks about how that's not the historic pattern. The historic pattern is about 79% of ongoing revenue. Just for clarification, are you recommending a specific percentage?
I would recommend the 67%, but with the context of it being a goal, not a hard target.
Can I make a comment?
Is there a second?
I'm not real comfortable with putting a percentage in there because we don't know what the budget's going to look like over the next few years. We may not be able to achieve that. I don't want to have to keep cutting more from county budgets if we don't have increases in there. So I would say, historically, it's been what, 70% 70, what did you say, 70? 79. And will that be, is that it's gonna be this year also with the income being down?
So historically, the county has been allocated roughly 67 or 70% of the total amount of revenue available over the last 6 years. Separately, as a percentage of just the ongoing revenue, if we pull out the one-time funding that comes from prior years, that percentage creeps up to about 79%. That's how much the county has been allocated on average year over year for the last 6 years. If your committee chooses to adopt this recommendation, you would be establishing a target or a goal that the county return back to, for 23-24, the county is set to be allocated about 95% of the ongoing revenue, and in this case it's the total revenue because there's no one-time money coming from prior years. So if your committee adopts this recommendation, you would be saying that you want to see the county to return to its historical pattern of about 67, or in this case specifically 67% of the revenue that is available for Measure Z.
So is that gonna cause more layoffs in the county?
This recommendation says to get to that number by fiscal year 26-27. That is a ways out. That provides time for the county to return to that number. Costs are always increasing. Staff and services always get more expensive. But this would provide the county time to find a way to get back to that number typically through deallocating positions that are vacant. So if somebody leaves a position, that is a way to pull back from the ongoing allocation that county departments receive each year.
I do feel we need to have some percentage for outside agencies, but I'm not comfortable with necessarily making those numbers.
So this is, like you said, Chief Robertson, this item was one of the kernels, one of the biggest pieces of discussion that I'm sure that we were all anticipating. And if your committee wished to get more granular into these things, staff could potentially work with the ad hoc on coming up with a couple different proposals. If that's what your committee wanted to see, staff would want some direction on what's the goal that you all want to see from Measure Z. Do you want to see that, outside agencies have access to funding? Do you want to see that county staff are not, or county departments are not negatively impacted in terms of the number of positions that are allocated and funded? Do you want to see a proposal that only funds certain services? This recommendation does not need to be, we don't need to get into specific percentages today. We could return with a proposal later. Staff would just want some guidance on what you want to see from that proposal that returns later.
Just to be careful here, the recommendation is establish a target. This, in fact, takes no absolute concrete action on the part of the committee, nor does it suggest an absolute concrete action on the part of the Board of Supervisors. It establishes a goal, and it is therefore a statement of philosophy and intent and desire, but it does not make any absolute changes to the process as it currently exists. What it does do is communicate to the Board of Supervisors that the committee has a concern and that we think that concern can be addressed by a specific direction and so on. But as is often pointed out here, we are only an advisory committee, and in this case, the advisory committee is advising the Board of Supervisors that we see a difficulty or a challenge, and our philosophy is that that challenge should be approached by a certain course of action. But this, in fact, does not cut anything or mandate anything. It simply states a philosophy to try to communicate to the Board of Supervisors that we see a problem short-term and long-term, and we think that this particular solution is the best one to ultimately achieve the desired results of keeping the fund solvent. But it absolutely does not take away anybody's position or anything else. It only establishes a philosophy and communicates that philosophy to the Board of Supervisors.
I would also like to add from my point of view, this statement is a way of the county making a commitment to support the agencies that exist outside of its budget and outside of its organization that are necessary to complete the missions of Measure Z, as stated as a ballot language. There are agencies that are required to be engaged if we're going to address all aspects of that ballot language. And my goal with this is crafting a statement that says the county sees that and is committed to preserving those relationships rather than eliminating those relationships when there is difficulty.
Okay, so
We have a motion and a second on the floor, and
we've had
we can
discussion.
continue
Is there
discussion and
anybody
have
else? Did
public
you want to
comment.
say anything, Tom?
Again, the devil's in the details, but generally the department is supportive of the concept because it would give us certainty in budgeting. And that certainly goes a lot longer than the one time, will we get it, will we not? Over the long term, we would appreciate certainty. And if that's the goal of this, we would be highly supportive of it. Thank you.
Sure.
I agree that there needs to be some philosophical target. Sitting in the supervisors meeting where they took no action, the reason I understood was because they were uncomfortable with our ad hoc committee and the muddied recommendations that we've discussed earlier. But the sense I got is they're really looking for us to help solve this problem. And I don't see anybody else or hear anybody else trying to solve this problem besides us. So a 3-year target or a goal is, like we've been discussing, it doesn't have any concrete effect now, but it's certainly going to push things. And I think that is part of our goal as a committee is to try to fix this problem. We've been talking about it ever since I've been here. If we're going to make a hard line based on data, and 3 years down the road with the current economy, we have no idea what the impact of that will be. So if you went and looked at the numbers and brought us back a report, I don't think it would have any real effect on the outcome. But I would just ask the motion makers if they would consider the 80% instead of the 67 as a way for us to compromise the different concerns that has been expressed here, and I would support that.
As an alternative, what if that description of a percentage was discussed as review of this committee every couple of years? Rather than trying to make it a hard percent, because as we talk about, one of the concerns is economics change. And do we want to put in a method for us to review what that percentage is moving forward so that there's something in place?
So that would be like the end of the sentence, and this is to be reviewed every 2 years?
Yeah.
Well,
I would like to chime in what Nicholas said and refine it a bit more, that it be part of our annual process when we review and approve the application that'll be sent out that year, that's the time that any percentages can then be reviewed and refined as part of that process.
So we have a motion on the floor, right?
We have a motion and a second on the floor.
For the 67%.
Correct. And to Chief Robertson's point about the 80%, it's, in my opinion, that is the 80% of the ongoing revenue is reflective of the historical trends as noted in your attachments here. The recommendation is probably misworded, I believe. That ongoing, if we're going to look at percentage of ongoing revenue, 80% would be reflective of historical trends. 67% would be reflective of total revenue. So that's counting
Oh, that's different.
one-time revenue. I believe that's what Ms. Robertson is getting after.
I'd like to make it an amendment to my motion, and to add that our target goal percentage is reviewed by the Citizens Advisory Committee every other year. And I say that as every other year because I believe there needs to be a little more time to define a trend.
Go ahead.
Just, we're getting tangled up in this, you know, what basis are we using for the calculation and so on. And while we identify the one-time money as one-time money, it in fact is unexpended. It is an unexpended component of the regular revenue and so on. So I think we're all getting tangled up in language here that doesn't serve us well. If in fact the county has achieved 67% of the total revenue, I think total revenue is clear to anyone who reads the sentence. If you try to get into the one-time, ongoing, blah, 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 blah. So I would like to suggest to the maker that we amend the language to say, establish a target of 67% of the total revenue. That way there's no equivocation and there's no confusion about what you're identifying as the basis for calculation. And then in fact, the 67% of the total revenue reflects 78% of the ongoing. So you're talking the same thing, but you're talking it in language that's clear and understandable to everyone, even if they don't have a foundation in what we're doing.
I would accept that, but I would like to include a process for this committee to review it.
The second would accept both amendments.
Okay.
And the maker would also accept.
Okay, so just to be clear, here's the motion. We have a motion and a second on the table. We've gotten public comment. The motion is establish a goal of 67% of total revenue to be allocated each year to county departments to be achieved by fiscal year 26-27, and for that target goal to be reviewed every other year by this committee.
Is that it? Okay.
All right.
Then I call for the vote.
Okay, we'll go out for a roll call vote. Ms. Miller
Yes.
and Ms. Trent?
Can I go last? I'm still thinking.
No.
Then I'm going to go no.
Ms. Campbell?
Yes.
Mr. Zemer? Mr. Robertson?
Yes.
Sheriff Hansel?
No.
Mr. Bronco?
Yes.
And Mr. Cole?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 5-3.
Did we get Doris?
Okay, so we had pulled out a couple of them that have not been voted on. Was it your intention that we go back and have further discussion on those, or?
No, we have voted on all the recommendations.
I thought we exempted number, okay, 3 was only pulled out because it was handled separately. Okay, my
Correct.
apologies. Okay.
Okay.
There,
Other action is still
Vice,
left.
yes, Vice Chair Campbell, there is one more other action that your committee could discuss if you so wish. There was another action at the bottom is to reconsider the fiscal year 23-24 recommendations after reduction to county allocations. Sorry if that's not specifically clear. But the Board of Supervisors ad hoc was tasked with, like I said earlier, essentially finding more money in Measure Z by potentially reallocating or deallocating positions that were awarded in the 22-23 cycle. That could potentially free up about $1.2 million. Additionally, staff working with the Board of Supervisors ad hoc are looking for other potential savings in Measure Z. And the Measure Z ad hoc discussed maybe if the Board of Supervisors finds additional money that this committee might want to look at recommending different allocations, because even if the Board of Supervisors could find additional money, it's probably no more than $2 million, which would make available about $2.6 million for allocation. Your prioritized list that you provided to the Board of Supervisors, the number one application there is the fire chiefs, which requested $3 million. So following historic patterns, if all of these savings could be found, the total amount that staff and the Board of Supervisors essentially finds would most likely be provided to the Board of Supervisors, because this committee has only provided the recommended list. And so I would defer to Ms. Trent if she wanted to kind of expand on any particular mechanisms for providing refined recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on fiscal year 23-24.
Well, it was talked about that there is a good chance that there will be more funding. And it was kind of put out there that the board would like us to come to them with a recommendation, you know, if we did have that more funding, and maybe partially fund, so we could go through the list a little bit further. So that's an option that we need to make, you know, whether we, you know, want to. They would like to have, you know, us bring something to them with, you know, with some partial, so they don't have to do it all themselves. But you know, if we do that, I would actually like to know how much that we have to allocate, so we can, you know, decide on that.
Okay, Billy?
As far as our procedures goes, in the past, when we've prioritized our recommendations, it's up to the board then, if there's extra money, to go down the list and to fund the projects that they believe, you know, fit with the mold of Measure Z. And so,
And with the amount that they want.
with the amount. So if there's more money, I'm not sure that we need to take any action. We have a priority list, and they can go down. If they choose to skip over, let's say, only partially fund fire, and then skip over ambulances and go to positions down the line, they have the ability to do that.
Which they've done in the past.
Which they've done in the past, yes. So I'm not sure if there's anything else that we need to do, other than just say, we already made our recommendations.
And I think that would require almost a whole other meeting, you know, to make that decision. Because we don't know how much money we have, right? So we can't make a decision about that.
Oh, go ahead, Glenn.
I'm in favor of at least having a discussion about this option. Boiled down to its brass tacks, there's three potential options. The first is if no action is taken on the county's part to retrieve the money that was from the unfilled and vacant 22-23 positions, then we have $623,000. Fire probably gets it all, and the process is done. That's option A. Option B would be to say, we can, as a committee, recommend to the Board of Supervisors that they recover the $1.2 million that exists in the non-public works, vacant positions that were funded via the 22-23 distortion process. And that would give us another $1.2 million. Again, if you're going to follow the historic trend, you take the $1.2 million and the $623,000 and you give $1.8 million to fire and you'd be done. To me, there is a more desirable third alternative, and that is to recommend to the Board of Supervisors that they deallocate the 16 positions that have been identified by the CAO as currently vacant from the 22-23 process. Take a look at the existing vacancies that currently exist from the historic county side and supply the committee with a figure that is available for funding. And based on our adoption of the possibility of partial funding, as much as I have allegiance to the fire agencies and so on, in the current environment, I cannot see giving them all $3 million, even if $3 million was available. So I would like to see direction from this committee to the staff to complete the process of looking at what funding could be recouped from the historic county positions, and then come back to this committee and say, if you take this action, you have $1.2 million from the unfunded 22-23 positions. We have X amount as currently undetermined from the historic positions. Those two combined with the 623 gives you a pot of money, and how do you want to distribute that and make that the recommendation of the Board of Supervisors? The reason I'm being that aggressive about it, and I understand it is an aggressive posture, is if you attended the board meeting, it was painful. And there was no clear direction or process or even, I think, understanding of the totality of what the options and stuff were. So I think absent a very specific recommendation from this committee, you're not going to get the best possible decision from the Board of Supervisors. And I feel it's incumbent upon us to try to give them a good roadmap, if you will, understanding that this is advisory, and consider the portion of funding that's potentially available to try to do a couple of things. If we don't do that, say we just give the 623 to fire, for example, okay? There's going to be $1 million, $1.2 million, we know at least available probably by mid-year, because the 16 county positions aren't going to get filled. So that money's going to reemerge anyway, and then you're back in the process of mid-year, we've got this money available, what do we do with it? So you've not advanced your position at all by ignoring that reality. So I'd like to see us be, I'll say, non-traditionally active and try to provide them with a roadmap. It was clear in the ad hoc meeting that they are desperately seeking our assistance in this. And to be perfectly honest, I think we're in a better position to give a good recommendation to them if we consider those options.
I'd like to know, what is the time frame in all this? I mean, for us to come back together again, you have to get this stuff together. They need it by when? They need the recommendation by when? I don't see us coming together every week, or every other week here, but when do they want it by?
No, this wouldn't be every other week. This would be when it would likely be after budget adoption.
Which is when?
Which is in the end of July, or end of June, sorry. So this, if I'm understanding the conversation correctly, this is if the county can identify additional funding available for Measure Z, this committee wants to get back together to refine its recommendation to the Board of Supervisors. That realistically would happen probably sometime in the summer, July or August sometime.
Okay, so it's not in the next couple months?
No.
Okay.
In light of the board creating their ad hoc committee to talk to the Measure Z ad hoc committee, it seems that this discussion just should be tabled for the time being until all that discussion could occur between the two ad hoc committees.
I disagree with that. I think if we're going to do this, let's just do it. You know what I mean? I mean, the ad hoc committee's done their job and they understand it. And, if we're going to do it, let's just make a decision. That's my opinion.
For point of clarity, Sean, do you view the ad hoc committee as completed its obligation?
Yes, that is, the ad hoc was tasked with providing a recommendation to the Measure Z committee. And that is what today's discussion was about. So in that sense, yes. I will say that the Board of Supervisors is interested in working with this committee on a deeper level to refine and work through its own recommendations, because the Board of Supervisors has directed their own subgroup, their own ad hoc, to return with, after considering some kind of percentage allocation methodology. They're interested in working with the Measure Z ad hoc or the Measure Z committee on that specific process.
So would we have to, since they've already done their job, they've completed their task, would we have to recommend a new ad hoc committee or use the old one if we decide to go that way? And then they'd meet and then we'd meet with them again? I mean, it just seems like, I just feel like, if they want a recommendation
Yeah.
from us, then I think we're all adults and we can definitely make a recommendation on,
So as
we've done this before.
Yeah, so as Nick said, or as Nick's question led to, the Measure Z ad hoc has done its job. They provided their recommendations to your committee. Like I said, the board is interested in working with the ad hoc group. If your committee wants to authorize that to continue that work, that should probably be an action that this committee takes. Just to make sure that this committee is okay with that work continuing. If not, I think that the ad hoc would probably I think the ad hoc's job is complete.
Does anybody have a recommendation?
It seems to me the decision today is, do we live by our historic process and simply stop our interaction with the Board of Supervisors based on the transmittal, which has already happened, of the recommendation list, and said, here's our recommendation list, it is your issue to deal with. Ultimately, it's going to be their issue anyway, but I can't help but believe there would be a better result if we could find a mechanism to continue to interact with them, whether the chair wants to appoint an ad hoc, whether the committee as a whole wants to meet with the board's ad hoc. I don't know what mechanism is there, but I really believe in my heart that the community will see a better result if we stay engaged to some degree. I'd be very uncomfortable just walking away and saying, we've done our historic process, leave it alone. I don't think anybody's going to be happy with the result.
They haven't seen your list yet, though. They haven't seen the recommendations so far.
Not in any formal way, no.
No. Sean?
So traditionally, I would completely agree with the sheriff that we've done our job, made our recommendations, it's up to the board. That said, we gave them that, and they said we should meet with the ad hoc committee because we don't really know how to proceed. So I would agree with Mr. Zima that through the chair, the ad hoc committee or the whole committee should meet with the identified two supervisors, and we can give them our recommendations through this process, as well as what Mr. Zima is recommending for reconsideration of this year, which is very frustrating in many ways. And then as to, further meetings in July, that's, again, complicated. My hope would be we would meet with them once, communicate our recommendations that we've made decisions on today, and then they would take that ball, so to speak, and do their work.
So they have not seen our whole list, right? Is what you said earlier. They have not seen
The Board of Supervisors as a full body has not seen this whole list, no.
Okay, so once they see it, they may not feel like they want to still meet. I mean, maybe it's complete enough for them. I don't know. So is the ad hoc committee interested in continuing? And do you have the time to do this? Just a minute, let him speak.
Like I said, I support an interaction in some mechanism. I sensed early in the meeting the concern that the ad hoc had kind of gotten ahead of itself. Mm-hmm. And I think if I had been outside the process, I think I would have shared that concern, quite frankly. I feel very comfortable in asserting to the committee that didn't happen, and that Nicholas, and maybe even Tammy very explicitly communicated to the CAO's office, we need to meet and get the full committee's go ahead or thumbs down on these, because it makes no point for us as an ad hoc committee to talk about them when we don't even know if they have the support of the full committee. So I have a completely clear conscience about the way we processed it. I think that a full meeting of this committee and the ad hoc committee is the way to go, because I think in a couple hours, we could lay out pretty distinct options. You don't want to have a philosophical discussion in that setting because they're looking for a concrete answer. And I think this committee understands better than anyone in the community what the options are for the concrete answers. We might not agree on which answer we should select, but I think we can identify them with a high degree of specificity. So the most productive circumstance for the community to me is for this entire committee to meet with the ad hoc committee of the Board of Supervisors, say to them, there are 6 different tracks that you can take. Here's the costs and benefits of each one. Now you're the decision makers, go make your decision. But without that intermediate step, they're going to struggle and strain and just not have the best solution for the community. So I would try to support one more meeting of this total community and the ad hoc committee. I'm a little curious about the timeline. You're saying this would happen after budget adoption. How would that be functional?
So staff will continue working with the Board of Supervisors ad hoc committee regarding Measure Z. That is going to take time to do. We're in the middle of budget adoption for the entire $500+ million budget. Measure Z is a piece of that. We know that county departments have not filled these positions, right? So we can still move forward adopting the budget. We can still move forward with identifying potential savings, and then later on, after the budget is adopted, we can revise the budget once we've identified savings. Regarding this committee meeting with the Board of Supervisors ad hoc, that I believe is fully inappropriate. I believe that this committee has an ad hoc designated. If your committee wants to work with that ad hoc, continue working there. The appropriate way to pursue that would be to give direction to that committee or that ad hoc committee to work with the Board of Supervisors ad hoc. But bringing the Board of Supervisors ad hoc into an advisory committee meeting, I believe, is inappropriate.
One of the things that I'm thinking about is, and what led my question about the goal of our ad hoc committee being complete is, I see the value of continuing this conversation with their ad hoc committee, but I believe it's a new intention. And from my point of view, I wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for more members of this committee to participate. I didn't want it to be the same membership of our ad hoc committee moving forward representing that discussion. And so in my mind, this is a new ad hoc committee with a new intention. Then through that gives the opportunity for other committee members to participate. Is that reasonable?
That's completely up to your committee. If you guys, if this committee wants to assign new members to work with the Board of Supervisors ad hoc, that's completely your prerogative.
Just for clarity, because of my hearing, did I understand you to say you thought the meeting of the Board of Supers ad hoc and this full committee was inappropriate?
Correct.
Okay.
I have one more question. So if you picked 3 new members of the committee and they go talk to the Board of Supervisors committee about things that we've already talked about, isn't that kind of a Brown Act? Because they've already talked to 3 of us and now they're going to talk to 3 other ones? That, to me, seems like a Brown Act violation.
We would have to work through that. I don't believe it is. A Measure Z ad hoc committee, you can have several different Measure Z ad hoc committees tasked with different things.
But if they're talking about the same subject.
Right, and your committee has already taken action on their recommendations, on these recommendations. So assigning an ad hoc, a smaller working group to work with the Board of Supervisors, letting them know about the actions that this group has taken, I think is would be fine. There's
So is
not
that all
anything
they'd
that,
be discussing is what the actions that the group took?
and working towards what the board wants, which is deallocating
And that's what we've already
county
discussed with them.
positions, also working towards these percentage goals that your committee just adopted today.
But those are all things that we've already discussed. So that now they're discussing it with 6 members instead of 3.
Billy?
So this meeting is being recorded, and so any of the board of supervisors can actually watch this meeting if they're not already watching it right now. And so they're going to see our recommendations and understand our point of view. I think what the bigger question is, they recommended that we, I guess, help them out with allocating the potential funding of potential $2 million worth. And so I think the question in front of our committee here is, do we want to help them out and provide another opportunity for us to go over the applications and re-rank them if there is another $2 million? Or do we want to push forward with the recommendations that we already have provided them and say, due to the late nature of the budget time, we're not going to be able to assist you with maintaining or deciding on whether or not you want to spend this money or not.
I think it was kind of suggested what they would really like to have is us to go through the top part of the list and decide, kind of make a recommendation on, going down the list a little bit and recommending to them.
Well, an ad hoc committee can't do the final recommendation. It would have to still come back to us,
That
which
would be the whole committee. They wanted the whole committee.
Yeah, but I think, Sean's saying that would be inappropriate for them to come to us, their ad hoc committee. We'd have to have an ad hoc committee, meet with their ad hoc committee, then you guys would have to bring that back, and then we'd have to vote and figure out who should get what. And
No, that's not what I was talking about.
Oh.
I was talking about just this committee meeting and making a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors if there was additional funding.
But I thought they wanted their ad hoc committee to meet with us.
I don't know.
Or
I
whatever.
didn't-
Oh, that was
I
what they
didn't hear.
said at the board meeting, yeah. Go ahead.
Can I,
Sean.
go ahead. Mr. Zima, go ahead.
Can an advisory committee such as is constituted, such as ours, have a workshop session where we would invite the board's ad hoc committee to participate in the workshop? Let me explain why. The sheriff and I have a different philosophy on this, okay? I think I respect his position, but I just happen to disagree with it. But I don't want to be part of a committee, a subcommittee, talking to the Board of Supervisors with the impression that I represent every viewpoint at this table, because I don't. But I think I have a reasonable viewpoint to be represented. That's why I'm struggling to find a way for this entire group to meet with the ad hoc committee. And if a workshop session would accomplish that, then I think that's the most beneficial outcome, because no matter who you pick on this committee, you're going to get partial philosophies represented. And as much as I believe in my own position, I don't want to advocate it at the expense of somebody who has a different viewpoint. I don't think that's ethical. So is there any format in which a meeting between this entire committee and the ad hoc is appropriate?
So these are public meetings. Any member of the public can come and express their point of view, including members of the Board of Supervisors.
So, does anybody have a recommendation, or do we want to just let this go? Sean, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, going back to the sheriff's question and Tammy's point as to what her understanding of what the supervisors, I'll speak for myself, and as the representative of fire is, I'm not going to change my allocation, my prioritizations of allocations. And again, representing my interests, even with the 1.2 to 1.6, even with a potential another amount in the same, our application is still going to consume the entirety of that. So I certainly am against partially funding fire. And after that, it seems like a moot point unless there's some significant amount of money. When this occurred last year, the Board of Supervisors chose to fund everything. And as Mr. Zima pointed out in the public meeting, that wasn't the most prudent fiscal choice, and that's why we're in a position we're in today. So for me, my recommendation would be an ad hoc committee is either given a new mission or a reform to meet with the supervisors ad hoc committee, because the recommendations represent our philosophy of what needs to be changed. So saying things like you need a reserve fund, maybe you shouldn't allocate all of your unspent or unallocated funds to all of the applications. You need to still pick through them. I think those are what we think is important and what we are looking for, the accountability, and that's our due diligence. So I don't think functionally it would be a good idea to go through the applications again and repeat that process. I'm very absolute on where we are with that, but to the chair's question, I would recommend the ad hoc committee be reformed with a new intent, as Mr. Cole said, meet with the supervisor ad hoc committee, because that is what they wanted, that's what they communicated, so I believe that that's what we should do.
And talk to them about the recommendations that we've read today.
Yes, again,
Okay.
being in the meeting, their biggest discomfort and the biggest confusion was, as the sheriff pointed out at the beginning, and Mr. Zima's clarified, is they were uncomfortable making a decision without hearing the recommendations from the ad hoc committee, and there seemed to be a lot of confusion as to the ad hoc committee's function, and frankly, they created two appointees for a committee that they didn't need to appoint, because we were waiting for a report from our ad hoc committee, and then we were going to do what we said we would do.
Right.
So it's very muddied, but I think the opportunity is here to communicate. We have solutions to the problem that we've asked them to address for the last several years, and we would like those to be dealt with.
Okay. Yes.
I have a concern about the appointment of a new ad hoc simply because the process we've just discussed, the ad hoc may or may not be representative of the views of the total committee. So if the ad hoc consists of, say, Tammy and the sheriff and Nick, okay, they can come to a consensus as that ad hoc committee, but they don't know that that consensus is supported by the totality of the Measure Z committee. So they could come to a quasi-agreement with the ad hoc committee of the Board of Supervisors. The board's ad hoc committee goes back and goes, oh yeah, we got it all figured out. And then the recommendations come back to us and we're all scratching our heads going, wait a minute, we never talked about this. So the mechanism of the ad hoc to me seems to be ill-suited to this circumstance, because the ad hoc would have, no matter who it is and no matter whose views that it represents, has to come back to this full committee in order for their recommendations to be
Okay.
vetted.
So Billy?
Yeah, just real quick, I agree, and that's why I believe there's still work that has to be done. The CAO has to kind of put down our recommendations and vet those recommendations out, and specifically put the language in here. Like we talked about before, we have a sentence here that describes what we would want. We've had a robust discussion. Now the CAO's office is going to put together our recommendations. I would encourage that our ad hoc committee stay in place as is, work with the CAO's office to come up with the definitions of each of these recommendations so we can bring it back here to vote, and then that ad hoc committee can then present our official recommendations to either the Board of Supervisors, which I would recommend, or the ad hoc committee, and then so everyone is on the same page. It's been voted, it's been vetted, and that is our total stance as far as how we should move forward in the coming years.
Right, I agree 100% with that.
I would make that motion.
Would you
Okay,
like to
you're gonna
make that a motion?
Okay, Ms. Trent has made that motion.
Second.
All right.
Could you just codify the motion to make sure I understand it? I'm sorry, I'm old and slow.
So it's an interesting meeting. So this committee has already adopted these recommendations. Some of these recommendations, like you said, Sheriff, require some clarity. to actualize some of these things, like the self-audit, the policy, what's that exactly going to look like? That still needs to return to this committee regardless. And I believe your motion is just trying to remind everybody that that is what we need to do. That is the process that we are going to undertake anyways, because we adopted these recommendations. The discussion was around, should the ad hoc, the Measure Z ad hoc, continue working with the Board of Supervisors? And that is what we are trying to determine right now. If we do nothing, your Measure Z ad hoc's mission is complete and they will no longer work with the Board of Supervisors ad hoc. If your committee wants to take an action to authorize a Measure Z ad hoc to work with the board through specifics that they talked about at their last meeting with your recommendations in mind, that is up to your committee to do. But if your committee does nothing, I will return to your committee with these recommendations actualized, put pen to paper, but the Measure Z ad hoc will not work anymore.
That isn't the motion, though, necessarily. Billy, could you repeat what you said so we can make it a motion, please?
Well, what I hear Sean saying is it's not necessary.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
And so Sean is going to essentially do all the work. The CAO is going to bring it back to us, and our entire committee is going to vet it. At that point in time, our committee is going to decide what we're going to do with it. Either the CAO is going to bring it up to the Board of Supervisors, or however we're going to do it. So
Or give it to their ad hoc committee. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great clarification. I think, again, sitting in the public meeting, I think what the board was looking for was our representative through the chair, or if it's a report from the our ad hoc committee, to give them the recommendations. But like you're saying, the procedures there, having worked for a few years with the Fire Services ad hoc committee, the intent is to provide a mechanism within the Brown Act to be able to work through problems that bring solutions that have been worked on, and then there's some adoption, and then the decision makers can discuss how that should work. So for me, the solution that you just created it meets that intent, and I think it alleviates the concern that Mr. Zima talked about. So essentially we're like a step behind where we wanted to be, or 2 steps behind. So
Is that a second?
well, I'm hoping the sheriff will take back his motion because it's unnecessary.
That's what I was just thinking, that the
Okay.
motion is unnecessary, so
Okay.
I'll withdraw a motion and just wait for you to bring back all that written and let the whole committee
Okay.
approve it.
Sounds great.
Yeah, and that will likely occur in the fall, because that is our next regularly scheduled meeting, I believe is in October. So I'll put pen to paper for these policies, return to this committee in October with policies, the self-audit and all those things. And I will say the Board of Supervisors ad hoc, I'm not exactly sure what the next step in their process is, if they want to continue moving forward with potentially looking at providing recommendations to the full Board of Supervisors on what to do with 23-24 allocations. But this committee's work has already been done. You guys, this committee has already provided its list of prioritized applications, and the ad hoc has completed its work.
And they did a great job. All right. So we're done on the agenda, yes?
I believe our work is done here.
All right, thank you, Sean. So I call, any other discussion? I call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you.